those who maintain a relationship with their loved ones tend to live longer. And those who cut off the relationship, let's say if you stop seeing your sister or your brother because you have some argument, it can actually affect your longevity. And we know that social isolation is now a known risk factor for poor outcome. And in fact, it contributes more adversely towards health than, let's say, smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So being socially isolated is worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now, building on this, I made an observation that I don't know if you may recall, many years ago, there was a Hollywood movie star by the name Christopher Reeves, who used to play the role of Superman. And in 1990s, he had an injury and he fractured his neck. He fell from a horse and fractured his neck. He was paralyzed for about 10 years, and after that, he passed away. I think he passed away around in 2003 or 2004. Within a year of his death, his wife, who was in early 40s, was a non-smoker, died of metastatic lung cancer. Now, that time I was an intern just trying to explore the field of oncology, and I was curious about this as to, are these two events linked? Can death of spouse really affect you so much that you develop cancer?
Joining us today is Dr. Syed Jafri, an oncologist, a researcher, and a professor. He is the author of 40 Spiritual Rules for the Journey of Life from Al-Qur'an, with a medical degree from Aga Khan University and specialized training from Indiana University, Louisiana State University, and the University of Arizona. Dr. Jafri brings a holistic approach to healing, treating not just the body, but the mind and soul as well. His clinical expertise in cancer treatment is complemented by a deep interest in the human experience, the nature of life and death, and the spiritual wisdom that can guide us. Today, we're going to dive into the 40 spiritual rules for the journey of life, which is a profound concept that challenges our attachment to the material world and invites us to look beyond the veil of illusion. Some questions I've been asking myself is, why do we cling to things that inevitably fade? What is the true nature of reality? And how does understanding this illusion help us live with greater purpose, meaning, and peace? These are some of the questions we'll explore with Dr. Jafri today. Dr. Jafri, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. And good morning from here. It's still morning time here.
You're most welcome. For centuries, science and spirituality have been perceived as separate realms, one dealing with empirical evidence and the other with the unseen mysteries of existence. But as we advance in medicine and neuroscience and even quantum physics, we begin to see a profound intersection between what was once thought to be opposites. And you stand, Dr. Jafri, at this unique crossroads, both as a scientist treating cancer and as a rational thinker exploring life's deepest spiritual truths. So do you believe science and spirituality are fundamentally opposed, or are they two sides of the same coin?
Thank you for this question. You have to trace the history of human thought, how things progress. And if we go back to, let's say, time of the Aristotle and Greek philosophers, at that time, rational inquiry was the way of figuring out the big questions of life. That's why Western philosophy developed. And then that transitioned into, when the Islam came around 7th century, then a lot of Muslim philosophers took up the same concepts of Greek and then built on that, integrating revelation into it. And there was also at that time, early science was developing, like algebra or algorithm. Very basic concepts were developing. And then as human thought progressed, things moved towards Western civilization, in which there was a scientific revolution. There was Renaissance, Enlightenment, scientific revolution, in which the forefront of figuring things out or understanding about the world, the method that they adopted was the empirical method, that we have to do some experiments to understand nature of things, which is great. And it really has transformed the world over the past 300, 400 years since the time of Isaac Newton and Galileo. We have learned how to learn nature, how to figure out what nature is, how to manipulate it. This is the progress of human thought. Each approach has its own epistemology, their own way of figuring out what true is. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy which deals with knowledge, what knowledge is. And there are various ways of acquiring knowledge. Philosophy relies more on rational inquiry or putting an axiom and going through deductive reasoning, whereas empirical method relies more on doing an experiment on nature of things. Now, each thing has its own limitations. For rational inquiry, you can only go that far. The same way with empirical method, you can only go that far because you need some data to figure out things. Now, spirituality also has its own way of acquiring knowledge. Is through what's called intuitive knowledge, something that comes from within. You know what is true. It could be an epiphany. It could be a true dream. If we understand the source of knowledge and consider that each source is a valid way of knowing things, then we should be able to reconcile the different point of views from different perspectives. Just to give you an example, let's say if scientists have a question, do elephants have kidneys or not? Let's say if there's a simple question and they want to learn about this. The scientific way of knowing this would be to take a sample of elephants. Let's say there are 10,000 elephants in the world. Of course, they cannot experiment on every animal. They'll take a representative sample, some from Africa, some from Thailand, some from India. Let's say they collect elephants. Their way would be to do an experiment on them, either through dissecting the body or doing an MRI to see if the elephants have kidneys. If 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 elephants have kidneys, then they can generalize and say, we've discovered that all elephants have kidneys. So that's the scientific way of answering this question, do elephants have kidneys? Now, let's say if the philosopher also has the same question, he wants to know, do elephants have kidneys or not? What would be the philosophical way of doing it? They'll pose an axiom that all elephants are mammals and all mammals have kidneys. Thus, all elephants should have kidneys. So that's the logical way of reaching the same conclusion. You see how the approaches are different? They're trying to answer the same question. Now, in this blend of things, the spirituality also comes, in which the source of knowledge is what's called intuitive knowledge that comes from within, from your heart or from within your soul. And that's a way of acquiring knowledge. Those who engage in advanced practices, the yogis, Buddhist monks, or prophets who have spiritually cleansed themselves, can have more advanced knowledge from this. They can have visions and true dreams, which tell them about the reality or truth of things. These are different ways of acquiring knowledge. Once we understand each other's position, we should be able to reconcile. Now, each method has its own limitations. For example, science cannot study things which they cannot detect or which they cannot see or manipulate. If somebody was to ask, how did the universe begin or what was before the universe, the science is inherently limited in answering that question because they don't have the data. They have to have data before they can analyze and give an opinion on this. As human thought is evolving, we would realize that really these different point of views are not necessarily in conflict with each other. It is just a different vantage point and the method of acquiring knowledge. So really the conclusion that I have reached is what we experience is really one reality, but the interpretation of things can be different because of our different vantage point from how we view things. So science has its method of acquiring knowledge and philosopher has its own way, and then religion and spirituality, they rely on revealed knowledge that comes from a higher source. One should be able to reconcile them, not necessarily be in conflict. I understand there would be some overlap, some contradiction, not true in one aspect, other true in another aspect, or not being able to verify what one is saying. Try to understand each other's point of view. The evidence is mounting that just scientific knowledge in itself is not enough to explain what everything is. Human life is just so big and the universe is complex that scientific method is not necessarily the only way of acquiring knowledge. We should be open to other avenues of learning as well to have a more comprehensive and holistic view of the very nature of existence.
This is the marriage of the logos and the mythos, the marriage of deep meaning, rational thought, and soul level healing. This division wasn't always present in healing traditions. There is this coming shift that will represent a reunion of these complementary aspects of human understanding. It's the distinction of measurement and interpretation. Both can measure, but it's the interpretation of that measurement that starts to bring about an incompatibility of alignment of views. In your journey, was there a rising realization or a particular moment or a perception where you saw the bridge between these two worlds clearly?
I cannot say there's any particular moment or incident that happened. I would say it is just a natural progression of trying to understand about nature of things. Of course, in growing up, there were two themes running side by side. One was the pursuit of science and knowledge and medicine, which had a way of knowing things. Also learning about cosmology and physics. That was one pursuit. At the same time, there was another pursuit from family background that we followed Islam and we learned the Quran. So they had their own ways of explaining things. So I was able to reconcile and say they don't necessarily mean different things. They're trying to explain the same thing, and we really should try and bridge them. And as you said, there is growing understanding that each provides its own value in human life understanding. We should not be completely disregarding, like the same way spirituality should not be disregarding science. I see patients in my clinic who want to try alternative ways of treating their cancer, and then they fail, and then they come back to clinic and say, oh, we need to try chemotherapy because what we were trying was not working. The same way, the scientific mind should also be open to interpretation from other ways of knowing things. There are limitations. Before rejecting something, we should have evidence. Just like before accepting something, we should have evidence. At the same time, before we say this is not true, we really have to have an evidence to say why is it not true. It may be that you say, I don't know because I don't have evidence for it, so I'm not sure if it is true or not. But we should not reject something without having a clear indication as to why we are rejecting. Just lack of evidence does not necessarily mean it's not true. It means you need to get more evidence. In medicine, there is a field called integrative medicine. The basic principles are that human beings are more than just physical bodies. There's a metaphysical or spiritual aspect of our existence as well. There's natural healing within the organism. And then we should facilitate healing using a comprehensive way where specific medicine or surgery or chemotherapy and radiation is, of course, integral part of things. But there are other methods as well. As long as we have scientific evidence for that, we should be able to adopt them in the clinical practice. I understand one has to differentiate from what is true and what is not, because there are people using all sorts of things. The job of the integrative physician or integrative practitioner is to see which method is, if there is evidence or not. Does clinical hypnosis work in certain situation or not? Does a particular herbal supplement work in a particular situation or not? So if we have a scientific evidence for that, then you should be open to adopting it.
Oh, I agree. We have to evolve. If we don't evolve, we will evaporate, and we must evolve without abandoning science. I think back to a life-saving operation that I had because of the extraordinary advances in our medical model. If I think 50 years ago, I'd be below ground. These medical advances have saved countless lives, and these achievements represent humanity's finest use of rationality and empirical observation. But there is a problem, because what has been lost in this progress, the recognition that human beings are not merely biological machines, we're conscious spiritual beings, and our healing is intimately connected to meaning and purpose and the signature of our soul. You mentioned the Greek philosophers. As we know, the ancient Greeks believed that a sound mind, a sound body were inextricably linked. Today's science confirms this connection through the study of psychoneuroimmunology, the way our thoughts, emotions, and stress levels impact our immune system and overall health. If I take this further, could a lack of spirituality or a deep disconnection from purpose contribute to illness, even diseases like cancer?
Yes, I think that's a good point that you raise. There is growing evidence that there are certain spiritual methods which do impact our health. For example, there's a statement by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that those who maintain a relationship with their loved ones tend to live longer. And those who cut off the relationship, let's say if you stop seeing your sister or your brother because you have some argument, it can actually affect your longevity. And we know that social isolation is now a known risk factor for poor outcome. And in fact, it contributes more adversely towards health than, let's say, smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So being socially isolated is worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now, building on this, I made an observation that I don't know if you may recall, many years ago, there was a Hollywood movie star by the name Christopher Reeves, who used to play the role of Superman, And in 1990s, he had an injury and he fractured his neck. He fell from a horse and fractured his neck. He was paralyzed for about 10 years, and after that, he passed away. I think he passed away around in 2003 or 2004. Within a year of his death, his wife, who was in early 40s, was a non-smoker, died of metastatic lung cancer. Now, that time I was an intern just trying to explore the field of oncology, and I was curious about this as to are these two events linked? Can death of spouse really affect you so much that you develop cancer? It doesn't really add up from our physiological perspective. How can that be? Now, the reason I paid attention to this event was because something similar happened to one of my classmates. When we were in medical school, his dad passed away suddenly, from cardiac arrest. And within a couple of years, his mom developed stage 3 lung cancer. And they both were physicians, both were non smokers. Again, from having a curiosity in oncology and interest, I always looked at these things as to how could that be. So in 2015, we got an opportunity to do a research study, and we asked this simple question: do major stressful life events increase the risk of developing lung cancer or not? So what we did was we took about 100 lung cancer patients, newly diagnosed, and gave them a questionnaire to fill out. And that question had various stressful events listed there. So there's a scale called Holmes and Rahe stress scale, which lists all the possible stressful events that a person can have and grades them by severity. Loss of or death of spouse is actually considered the most stressful event in somebody's life. Death of a child, divorce, a financial crisis, even retirement. So they list all the possible stressful events. So we took the top 10 ones that are the major stressful events, and we asked these lung cancer patients to fill out a questionnaire. Did you have any of this event, let's say, in your life or in past 5 years? And we asked the same question to a group of controls who were matched for age, for gender, as well as smoking status, but did not have lung cancer. And we asked them to fill out the same questionnaire as well, about 200 of controls. And what we found was that over a period of lifespan, there is really no difference between the number of stressful events between the lung cancer patients and the controls. But if you restrict the data to last 5 years, then patients with lung cancer are twice as more likely to report a major stressful event than patients without lung cancer. Then it's been reproduced in head and neck cancer and pancreatic cancer as well. So what we have learned is that if somebody goes through a period of major stress, that can actually be a trigger for developing lung cancer or cancer. It's not uncommon for me to see in my clinic that in late 70s, early 80s grandfather coming with metastatic lung cancer who's been losing weight, and I'm interviewing them, and he says, yes, I've been losing weight because I'm not eating properly. I said, why? What's going on? He said, I lost my wife a year ago. That person has been smoking for decades and has been exposing his body to carcinogen, but the body's immune system was taking care of the cancer or keeping the cancer at bay, because immune system does two things. Besides targeting the viruses and bacteria, it can also take out abnormal or cancer developing cells that are about to develop cancer. So immune system can actually take those out as well. What can happen is, biologically or physiologically speaking, that if your body has been exposed to decades of smoking, there's a lot of carcinogen in the body, there are mutations going on in the cells, but the immune system is still intact, strong, and it taking away all these abnormal cells or precancer cells. But if we go through in that background, if you go through a major stressful event, let's say death of a spouse, what it can do is it can reduce your immune system, becomes weakened. And at that time, that cancer can really blossom. We have some biological studies underway, find that correlation, but physiologically, it does make a sense that perhaps that's how these two events are linked. But that's more so speaking physiologically. But what I find more fascinating is that how spiritually linked we are with each other, or in a sort of a quantum way, that although we may not be physically linked with each other, but just like to entangle particles, what happens to one affects the other. So that relationship that a couple develops, let's say over 20, 30 years, is a real relationship. There is actually some connection at a spiritual level or at a quantum level, that if you love somebody, you're attached to somebody, you're actually attached to that person in some quantum ways. If something happens to one person, it can profoundly affect the health of another person as well, who is linked with that. So I think these are the things that the next generation of scientists need to explore, that besides just the physical causes or the biological causes, are there more sort of psychological or spiritual causes as well? There's a growing field of called quantum biology, which is try to explain, understand biological process at quantum level. So I think the field is gradually moving in that direction.
Would you say Is it possible that a lack of spiritual alignment weakens the body's resilience?
Yes, I think it can, because what spirituality does is it gives you a meaning or purpose of your existence. And also, it gives you a meaning or purpose of your suffering. Also, the other thing is that it gives hope that your death is not necessarily the end of things. There is more to come after this. And that helps people find peace with what's going on and have a better acceptance for what's going on. So it's people who follow a spiritual path tend to live healthier, tend to have a healthier lifestyle and have better social connections. So it does affect your ability to cope with medical issues or have a better, healthier lifestyle. Some of the teachings that spirituality, and it applies to most spiritual paths, is to develop patience, to have gratitude, and these inherently build resilience. So if a person is thankful, is grateful for what they have, they are less likely to be frustrated and angry and upset at day-to-day life. Having those traits or values which really belong not necessarily in our brain or heart but more so in our soul, like patience and gratitude and then forbearance for others, really that's what makes a person become spiritually strong. And the concept is that body and soul are not necessarily separate things but two aspects of the same reality. We are like a body soul unit, and then what happens to one can affect the other. And I think the example I gave you points towards that direction. Now, we can go into more detail as to what's the scientific evidence if there's soul or not, but I think that just to state a point that human beings intuitively know that there is more to their life than just a physical body. Pretty much everybody or most people accept that they have a soul, except for hardcore atheists or hardcore materialistic who really deny, unless they want to see a picture of soul or something, they would deny that. But most people intuitively know that there is more to their life. And this also comes from religious texts, both philosophical texts and Bible or Quran. They all talk about having a spiritual aspect of existence. And inherently, you can know that's true.
In your experience, have you seen cases where a shift in mindset or spiritual practice has influenced a patient's recovery?
I think what I've observed is that people who have a positive outlook towards their disease tend to do better versus those who have an approach of giving up or not willing to go further. But having some sort of motivation or an approach that I want to fight this or I want to get better, these kind of patients tend to do better. Whereas those patients who maybe get overwhelmed or maybe just too sick, they often don't do well. It's hard to quantify that, but generally people who have a positive outlook towards cancer tend to do better. What is very clear is having family support is key. Those same two cancer patients, one having family support, the other not having family support, can have a very different outcomes.
Something I was looking at was the connection between community and immunity. So do you feel that when you have a strong community, that has an effect not just on your biological immunity, but on other types of immunity and intelligences within the body, because you have that support. They've got your back, so to speak.
That's a good way of putting together community and immunity because it does affect our mood. So, meeting a friend or visiting a relative, or if you're sick, somebody visiting you does elevate your spirits. So it does have a positive impact. Again, I cannot quote a particular scientific study which show that your T cells go higher, etc. But it is a common observation that when you meet with friends or spend time with family, it naturally recharges you or gives you a boost. And if your person happens to be sick or ill, then of course it affects their illness as well. So you can say the depression goes down because with illness generally comes depression. And depression, you have lack of motivation of going seeing a doctor or even taking your medicine. But when you have somebody encouraging you or cheering you up, it's human nature. We like energy bundles. And when you come in contact with another positive energy bundle, the person lights up. That's why we know in boxing at the ring, there's usually a coach who's trying to encourage you to keep fighting because those words mean to that boxer, the boxer who's in that intense fight or match, having that somebody at the ring at the corner makes a difference. That's why they're there. And if they were not useful, why would people have them? They're always there.
As a cancer specialist, you work closely with patients who are confronting their mortality. And in many ways, medicine attempts to extend life, but spirituality teaches us to prepare for its inevitable end. So there's this tension between fighting for survival and accepting death, which is one of the greatest paradoxes of the human experience. In your book, and thank you very much for a copy of it, you explore the wisdom of the Quran on life's journey. What guidance does it offer about facing death? And how do you navigate conversations with patients who seek meaning in their illness?
So I tend to refer patients back to their own spiritual practice. So my job is just to remind them, explain to them that the cancer is a life-changing diagnosis. Things would not be the same anymore, especially those with advanced cancer. Their relationships, their job, their personal ego and personal self-esteem, everything changes. And especially when you're confronting a mortality that, in a year or 2 years, a person may not be around, the perspective changes. So my job is to guide them through that process, that besides the cancer treatment that you're getting, part of my job is to explain them honestly as to what to expect, because I don't want to keep them in dark. Because if this is terminal cancer, I think it's patients' right to know that it's terminal cancer, versus if this is curable cancer, it's my job to explain to them. And then we have counselors and we have chaplains who can help guide patients through that process. What I tend to do is ask them to consult their church or their spiritual leader, whoever, whatever faith they follow, to get guidance from that, to get support from them. And many patients do it intuitively. They already know that's what they're supposed to do. Recently, I had a patient, I was consulted on a patient with advanced lung cancer who was in the ICU, had already received a dose of chemotherapy without significant improvement, and the patient was still looking for more answers. I went into the room not knowing what to expect, because often patients are in that situation where they want to keep doing everything till the last breath, want to stay in the hospital. But to my surprise, the patient had already had a change of heart or change of mind, because what he said, what we did was I called my church over the phone and we had a sort of a prayer meeting over the phone, and then put me at peace. And then I'm now ready to get to the next phase of my existence. So having that understanding is very important. Having that sort of connection is very important for finding closure to them and for the family as well. Often these patients actually live a little longer. So we have learned is that if we start palliative care early in advanced lung cancer, towards the end of life, those patients actually receive less chemotherapy and live a little longer than those who don't start early palliative care therapy. Often advisable to be at home when you're facing your terminal event. So when we realize that the further treatment is futile and it's not working, one of the things I tell them is, where would you like to spend the rest of your time that you have? Would you rather be in the clinic, in the hospital, going through blood works and CT scans and MRI scans, or would you rather be at home, spending time with your family or whatever unfinished businesses that you have and you want to take care of them? And often patients, once they realize, coming straight from the doctor, that we have already fought enough, they make the choice, then they would rather be at home at peace with their family. And I think it's good for both the patients as well as the family members to find closure before the event happens, rather than to struggle to the very last moment.
What are your thoughts about the contemplation of death? Do you believe contemplating death can help us live more fully?
Yes, nothing is certain but death and taxes. It is a reality that we all have to say. It's sort of part of design of nature, that just as something is alive, it would eventually die, whether it's an ant or a plant or human life, even the whole galaxy, that's part of design. And it helps renewal in the nature. Let's say if the people were not dying and still have 10,000-year-old people hanging around, there would not be a lot of innovation. They want to stick to their way. So it's actually a way of moving the human society forward. Also, old generation passes away, new generation comes, they come with their newer ideas, and that's how human life evolves. Having that realization is very important. And I think this is something which is already self-evident. You don't necessarily need scripture to know this, that you're going to die. Everybody is going to die. In fact, everything around us in our immediate experience is going to die. What it does, it helps prioritize our time and our goals. If you know there is an end, and then you have to see, okay, what are my priorities then? Do I want to keep building more property or expanding my business, or there are other pursuits that I would want to do in this time that I have? Yes, I want to have a stable source of livelihood, but at the same time, I don't necessarily want to be consumed by doing that alone. What are there are other things? Just walking in the yard or park is enjoyable, or visiting a pond, or sightseeing, or visiting family, or writing a book. There could be any pursuit based on person's personal interest, but having that realization, which is self-evident, that there is an end to it, then a person, I think, is likely going to have more fulfilling life and more meaningful life, versus if we ignore that fact. And especially because the time of death for people is not determined. For some is in 20s, for some is in 40s, for some is in 80s. So it prepares you for the eventuality. And then also the natural question that comes, what happens when I die? That's, I think, part of linked with it. I think maybe part of the reason why people may not be willing to accept this fact is because maybe they're not clear about what comes after that. If you're ready for what comes after that, or have some sort of understanding or expectation as to what comes after that, then a person is more likely to acknowledge the reality of that. I think they trying to ignore this reality because we are not paying attention to what is after death. But if we have some sense or a clarity about what is after that, then death would not necessarily be a sort of dreadful thing that we have to scare you, but it's something that is a natural outcome of your life. For example, a fruit starts on a tree, it's a small fruit, not very ripe, and then eventually it becomes ripe. And then when it's ripe, it's time for it to fall. It cannot stay on that tree forever. That's what this natural cycle is, that it should eventually fall or be consumed. And that's what for us as well. As our soul grows, it reaches a certain time frame, and then it's time for us to exit, because the soul has already matured. It has already learned that what it's supposed to learn in this realm of existence, and it's time to move on.
That's a whole other discussion. There's a need for a new spiritual compass in society. Today, we see a global crisis, not just in health, but in the human spirit. And depression, anxiety, a whole sense of meaninglessness is rampant. And it seems as a society, we've lost our spiritual compass. In your book, you offer 40 spiritual rules as a blueprint for living a more meaningful life. Why do you think there's such a spiritual crisis in modern society?
Yeah, it's a profound question for me to be able to address. But I guess the answer lies is maybe more attention towards materialism or material aspect of things, or instant gratification that comes from using material resources. So the human life did evolve a lot after the Industrial Revolution, and of how the economy grew, and then there's more consumerism. There's a part of us which want to acquire new things, go new places, or build wealth. But there is a limit to it. That in itself is not necessarily enough. And the thing is, we all have a limited time frame, and you can do only that many things. So if the focus is just consumption and acquisition of material possessions, then you will spend most of your time doing that and would be ignoring your spiritual aspect of your life. So one of the dilemma of the scientific revolution is that it has detached us from our spiritual aspect. It's not acknowledged, or it's not necessarily paid attention to. And that's the argument I try to portray in the book, is that the reason why people have mental health issues or substance abuse or inability to maintain long-term relationship with others, or sometimes instances of self-harm or harming others, is because that void that they are not filling, which comes from doing spiritual practices or paying attention to that. Just as we have a physical body and we have a mind, we also have a soul. We have to address all these three aspects. So if somebody does not get enough nutrition or exercise, they would not reach their physical potential. They would be like a sort of stunted physically. Let's say somebody has chronic illness or malnourishment, the potential that they can reach, they would not reach. Some people may be mentally challenged, they're not that sharp. The same way, I think many of us, including myself, I think we are not paying attention enough to our spirituality to reach the potential that we all have. Finding that focus, I think, is very important, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, is so that people can pay attention. Well, there is a spiritual aspect of our existence as well, and just like we take care of our bodies and of our mind, we have to take care of our soul as well. And unless we pay attention to it and spend time for cultivating it, it would have problems. It can have disease in it as well. Just like if you don't exercise or eat unhealthy, your body can develop diseases. In the same way, if you don't do spiritual practices or don't look after your soul or pay attention to it, it can develop sickness as well, which may then manifest in a person's behavior or depression or something that make their overall health unhealthy.
One of the most timeless philosophical debates is the balance between destiny and free will. Many religious traditions suggest that everything has a purpose and is preordained, yet at the same time, we are given free will to make choices. The paradox is especially relevant when facing adversity or illness or unexpected challenges. How does your book address the concept of destiny versus free will?
Yeah, so that's an important question. Actually, the first book, The God and God of Science, written in 2018, goes more into detail of this, but I can try and explain some here. That the way my understanding is that we have to start from that there's a God or a higher power who has put in like a destiny for everything, not just for us, but for everything has a path and a potential to reach. Then there are certain framework in which we can operate. For example, we cannot determine our place of birth or in which family we would be born, or our natural inclinations. Some people have natural inclination towards poetry, some more towards science, some more towards mathematics. So everybody has a natural inclination. So many of those things are already set for us or determined for us. And after that, each has a path and a potential to reach. Now, what choices come in our way may not necessarily be in our control, but what to choose is in our control. So I think that's where the distinction is, that there is free will, but not the ultimate free will. To give you an example, if a person decides to drink alcohol, get drunk, and they also start to drive. Now they have made two wrong choices in the sense that they've drank so much that they're now drunk and then they're also driving. Now the possibilities that come their way, they have opened themselves to certain hazard for themselves, for others. So there's a certain path that they have opened up for themselves. On the other hand, another person, maybe in the same gathering, is still sober and decides not to drive, maybe call an Uber or call a friend. Now they have opened certain other choices for themselves. So it's a way the dynamic reality unfolds in front of us based on what choices we make. There's a famous story about one of our spiritual masters called Imam Ali, who was asked the same question and said, is this all predetermined or do I have a choice as well? We said, do you want a long answer or a short answer? He said, I'm a simple man, just give me a sort of a short answer. So I get it. He said, okay, why don't you lift your right leg? He said, okay, I can do that. I can lift my right foot. He said, now try and lift your left foot also. I can do that. I can lift both my feet at the same time. He said, it appears that you have a choice, but there are limitations to it. So that's, I think, it's an easy way of understanding that, yes, we have choices, but not everything is within our control. And sometimes we have the ability to choose, but what choices come our way may not necessarily be in our hand. But we also create our own reality. It's like a dynamic reality that unfolds in front of us based on what choices we make. So some people work hard and are disciplined, then they open up certain choices for themselves. On the other hand, another person who is not disciplined and is in, let's say, in drugs and bad habits, then they open other choices for themselves. It's like various ways where our path can go. As we make choices, we open up other choices for ourselves.
Do you think some things are preordained and predetermined and some things are self-determined?
Yes, I think yeah, it's a combination. It's a what you call an affair between two affairs. It's neither complete free will, not complete
Right.
predetermination. It's in between, and certain things are ordained for us, in which a framework in which we can operate, like our natural inclination, our place of birth, even let's say a time of death. So the big question. But within that time frame or a framework of things, we have choices. We can decide what we want to do with that time, with that opportunity. We can make best use of it or blow the opportunity and miss it.
Do you think people have the ability to change their fate, or is there a deeper divine orchestration at play?
Yes, I think there is people have, if they have time, if you have opportunity, then yes, you have choices. So there are certain things that people can do to change their outcome. Number one is understand what they want to do, have clarity, and then work towards that goal. Have a plan, have a discipline, how they want to implement that plan. Of course, it has to be realistic and achievable. The other things that can change our outcome is prayers. Prayers do have an impact on our life. If again, this understanding that there's an all-powerful, all-seeing God, who's merciful and kind. Having a connection with that reality is important because from his agency, he can influence things which may not be under our control. Because in order to change our fate or our life, there are things that are under our control and there are things that are not under our control, which are beyond our control. So who can influence that? If there's an all-powerful being which can influence all things, then praying to that person, having a connection with that reality can influence our personal life as well. So I think yeah, there's a tremendous possibility of changing, and I think what requires is determination, having a focus and determination, and working towards that goal. But also understand I think one of the points I make in the book that the outcome of our actions is not necessarily in our hand. So it may be that you work very hard towards a goal, you have a clear path, but it is not necessarily destined for you, or maybe it's not the right time for you. It may come 5 years later, or it may come 3 years later. So having that connection with that higher reality, I think, is important. We have to pay attention to what is in our hand and not necessarily what is in God's hand. One of the motivation of writing this book was, you might have noticed that the foreword is written by Dr. Edan Rios, who is my colleague. And the idea of this book came is that we were having this conversation. He's from Panama and he's my senior. I learned a lot from him. So we were having this conversation, and I pointed that fact that's written in Quran, that the outcome of all affairs is in God's hand. What is necessarily in our hand is to make an effort. So it may be we make the best of efforts, but the outcome is not what we are desiring. For example, take example of a cancer patient, a young leukemia patient who has pretty bad disease, and you're giving them the best chemotherapy and best supportive care. It just turns out that the cards are not in her favor or his favor, and the patient is eventually dies. So despite our best efforts and best intentions, it may be that the outcome is not what we wanted it. So having that realization, or that realization of our limitation of our effort, is also very important. That there are certain things that we cannot change, but there are other things that, yes, we can change by hard work and by prayers.
Beautiful. Your book draws from the Quran, but its message speaks to the universal human experience, regardless of religion or background. At core, we all wrestle with the same fundamental questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What's my destiny? People have these subconscious thoughts. Your intention in writing this book, was it for a specific audience, or do you see it as universal?
Yeah, the idea was universal because there are a lot of rules written in the Quran, and many are more specific for Muslims or those who follow a particular path. I wanted to focus on things which are common to us all as human beings. Just we have a same physical body, that everybody has one heart and two lungs and one liver, two kidneys. In the same way, we all have the same soul, same human soul. Even men and women have the same soul. Yes, biologically they may be different, but the basic design of human soul is the same. So if the medicine that works for one patient for a one problem, because that's how physical body is, then the same spiritual portion or rule should work for everybody. So that was the idea, that the rules that are mentioned here, or the guidelines that are mentioned in Quran, are these specific ones that I selected, are more general in nature, with everybody should be able to relate it. Like patience is good for everybody. It's not just it's good for one particular ethnicity or a particular group, or forbearance or gratitude. So these are things that apply to everybody. And I think most people should be able to relate to it. For example, every affair has a time. So that's a very sort of universal rule, that maybe you're working hard towards something, but the time of that has not arrived. All the necessary ingredients have not lined up. All the stars have not lined up. So you just have to wait a little longer before the time of that thing is ready. These are the broader strokes or principle that we should be familiar with. I think it would help us navigate through the journey of life. I think was the idea. As the title says, 40 spiritual rules for the journey of life. We are on a journey, and rules help us guide how to navigate through that journey.
Through your medical and spiritual lens, you offer us a rare and deeply needed perspective. It's one that reminds us that true healing is not just about the body, but also about the soul. When I was reading through your book, there was an invitation to go on a journey of reflection and discovery and transformation. There was a profound and beautifully articulated rule emphasizing the evolutionary nature of life and the journey towards spiritual perfection. It was rule one: life is a journey. And we know life is motion, and motion is a sign of life. Like you mentioned, a seed becomes a tree and a caterpillar transforms into a butterfly. But we too are evolving physically, mentally, and spiritually. But unlike the seed or the butterfly, we have free will. We choose our direction, our purpose, and whether we embrace the journey or we resist it. The question is, are we moving with intention or simply drifting through life?
Yes, I think that's the key point, that the rule which is mentioned in Quran, and it's many of the statements of Quran are actually addressed to mankind in general, not necessarily to Prophet Muhammad or to Muslims. It just says, "O mankind." So this particular rule says, "O mankind, you're all striving hard towards your Lord, and you would eventually meet him." Gives a sense of a journey, that you're moving and you have a goal, and that goal is God, which is like ultimate perfection. Now, we all inherently or intuitively seek perfection. We all want to be strong and powerful and knowledgeable and seek goodness and beauty, which are attributes of God. We are already moving in that direction. We are inclined toward that direction. Now, this course of life that we have been placed on has, of course, a meaning to it. And what is that meaning? What we have understood is the meaning is to evolve our soul, to make it more mature, to have this material, four-dimensional space-time experience so that we can acquire certain qualities and maybe get rid of certain qualities and mature spiritually. To give a parable, as you were pointing out, that you plant a seed and the seed becomes a sapling and then a small tree till it becomes a mature tree which starts giving fruit. So that is the potential that was in that seed to become that mature tree. If the seed gets the right ingredients, the right sunlight, the right amount of water, it should reach that potential. Same with, let's say, the example of a butterfly. It starts as a small egg and becomes a larva and a pupa till it eventually becomes a beautiful butterfly. So that small egg had that potential to become that beautiful object which we all want to seek, the butterfly. I think the same parable applies to each one of us. I think it's very important for what I call spiritual awakening. That yes, you can drift through your life without realizing there's a higher meaning and purpose behind this. You can go through the motions of getting an education and getting a relationship and having more kids, traveling, and I have this bucket list. I have to jump from this mountain and I have to go this place. But what's the big point? Why do you want to do all these things? The first step of spiritual awakening is to have that realization that we have a limited time frame in which we have to reach our potential. And a parable is of that butterfly. Each one of us can become the best version of ourselves or that beautiful butterfly. God has put that potential in each of us. Now, with us comes this added complexity of free will and intelligence that, unlike a plant or a butterfly, we are more intelligent being and we have a free choice. We can go this way or that way. So you can say the stakes are much higher. We can go really high or really low as well in both directions because we are a more advanced life form than a butterfly or a tree. Each person, wherever they are in their life, if they have this realization that I have to get somewhere or have to transform myself or become the best version of myself, then they would view their life differently. Life would have much more meaning in it. Even the suffering would have more meaning in it because sometimes suffering actually is there to help us grow spiritually. Sometimes suffering is, of course, seen as negatively. Why did this happen to me? Why did I have that loss? But what it does is it can cultivate the quality of patience and forbearance in you and also gratitude. Just like a person who's trying to build muscles need to go to the gym and in a way suffer, lift these heavy weights and have a regimen. So unless you go through that exercise phase or that regimen, your muscles would not grow. You would not become strong and powerful that you're trying to become. That's very obvious to everybody that we have to go through a period of suffering to grow physically. In the same way, spiritual growth often comes from suffering as well, sometimes that having a loss or having a difficulty may actually be, in a way, a blessing. And then each person can have a different challenge. Some people may have a physical challenge, that's a personal limitation. Sometimes they have a challenge in terms of having a special child. So some people have a special child, and that's their challenge. Sometimes people have a difficult spouse or maybe a difficult boss, and that's what their challenge is, or maybe financial issues. So these are all various challenges a soul is faced with. Each person, based on their makeup or whatever their design is, has a particular challenge. And they have to, first of all, acknowledge that this is a challenge. And this challenge is not necessarily a bad thing for me. It may be a thing for me to help me grow. Unless you see a hurdle, you would not jump, you would not develop the ability to jump. If everything is too easy for you, then it may actually be detrimental to us because if you never have a challenge or never really have to face difficulties, you may not grow and may become even more complacent. So that potential that was hidden in you would never come out, unless you face that challenge. So I think having that realization is important that each one of us is on a path. We all have a destination and accept and acknowledge challenges and navigate through life and not necessarily be despondent if you have a failure, because sometimes failure helps you grow stronger.
It's an opportunity to learn. There are gifts in those challenges, but it depends on your perception. In rule one, I want to accent on the fact you emphasize our ultimate destination is perfection, God. How do we as people balance striving for growth with accepting imperfection in our human experience?
So, yes, the idea I was trying to portray is if you look at our endeavors, what people are doing, irrespective of which culture you come from or which, religion you follow, we all have similar goals. For example, we all want longevity. We all want to live as long as possible, with of course with good health. We all want to have wealth because wealth gives us sort of power to do things and be able to control our lives. We also all seek beauty. Nobody wants to seek ugliness. We all seek goodness. Nobody wants bad things. Also, justice. Inherently, we are all seeking the same things. Or to be powerful. For example, somebody wants to be a counselor of their community, but once they become that counselor, they realize they want to become a congressman or a parliamentarian, maybe a senator or lord. So there are different levels of power. So the idea is that we seek power, and then there could be various avenues. You could want to be a CEO of your company or a boss in your organization. But the idea is we are all seeking power. But we realize that once we have reached that level of power that we were seeking, it's not enough. So what this tells us is what we all seek is the ultimate power, to be as powerful as possible, or ultimate goodness, or ultimate beauty. And that's how God is described, that God is that perfection that we all inherently seek. Whereas while we operate in this time space zone, we see objects of power or see objects of beauty or objects of goodness. Once we get to them, those are our immediate goals. We realize that's not enough. There's more that we want because our soul is tuned for that higher learning. When we are seeking those things, if our goal is that higher God, or let's say higher power or higher source, that becomes our goal, then these smaller goals become less important. Then getting to a certain position may have a different objective. So for example, you want to be a doctor for various reasons. You can be a doctor for, let's say, to earn lots of money or to become famous. So that could be your goal, that I want to be the best doctor so I can have the most money. Or you can say, I want to become a doctor because I want to pursue science and find cure for cancer, or I want to help people. Yes, I want to make some money, but at the same time, I want to live a life in which I am useful to others. So when you do the same thing but with a different perspective, then your intention and goals become different. Really, the goal, ultimate goal, is to seek God or a higher power. Then you're having a loss or having disappointment in certain endeavors is not necessarily a failure, as long as it's helping you grow in that direction. To quote an example, a few years ago, one of my friend, after a short marriage, he had a divorce. He was very depressed, and I was talking to him as a friend, and he said, "When you had this divorce, did you feel closer to God, or did you drift further away?" He said, "No, actually, going through this painful experience actually made me closer to God rather than being away from it." I said, "How do you see that? Was it beneficial for you, or is it harmful for you?" So, of course, going through divorce is a painful experience, but if that experience actually gets you closer to your higher goal or a bigger goal, then it may actually be working in your favor.
Everything we perceive as permanent, relationships and status and possessions, as we talked about, eventually fades away. You describe life as a receding shadow. Why do we struggle to accept its transience?
Because I think inherently we seek permanence. Our design is that, for example, the concept of heaven is eternity, right? You live there forever. So that's, I think, what our inherent soul's nature is, that what we are trying to achieve. But we are operating in a zone where things are not that nature. That's why we, in a way, don't belong here. So the death is an exit from that zone of existence. Our soul is really designed for that permanence or ultimate or perfection. The dilemma for us is that we operate in a zone where things are not like that at all. Things are deceptive. So your good friend may not be that good friend. He may be deceiving you, or your spouse may cheat on you, or whatever you are seeking may not be satisfied for you. So you reach a certain stage in life and you're still unfulfilled, because that's what the very nature of this life is. And I think this is a learning environment. This is a training ground for soul to understand what one from the other. And I think it's necessary to go through this training ground before we get to that ultimate place of existence, so that our soul is mature enough or has already had the experiences. For example, if I never face any evil in my life, I would never appreciate goodness. I have to have some evil to appreciate what goodness is. Or let's say if there's never any darkness, I would not appreciate light. I would not know that there's light, because if there's no area of darkness, or I've never experienced darkness, I would never be able to appreciate what goodness or what light is. So this zone of existence is very important for, you can say, training of the soul. So it can experience both the good and the bad. And then it can appreciate what actually good is. Because without experiencing bad, you would not experience what good is. So we have learned this is the zone of opposites, or a high and a low, and a soft and a hard, and a wet and a dry. So that's how we learn. And I think having this experience is important, imperative. That's why I guess God, in his grand scheme of things, decided we should spend time here so that we can be ready for the next phase of our existence.
Modern physics supports the idea that the material world is an illusion with matter existing as energy waves, and matter at the quantum level oscillates between wave and particle forms. What does this tell us about the nature of reality?
Yes, I think very important that there is a statement in Quran which says that the life of this world is an enjoyment of a delusion. That's what the actual statement is, that you're enjoying a delusion. It's like you're living in a matrix. And you look through, as you said, through the lens of modern physics, really at the core of what exists in our understanding is quantum fields, which are supposed to fill this space-time zone that we experience. These fields are of energy, and with this field, there is some oscillations in the energy, some vibrations, which create the particle. And the particle comes into existence and then disappears. And the entire material experience that we have is made out of that. So inherently, it appears a very fragile existence, which it may not be there the next moment you look at it. And it is so dynamic and changing. But I think that's what the nature of things are in this world. That's why they are not satisfactory to us, and then after a while we get bored from it, or they decay. They have a sort of inherent decay in them, that yes, they can reach a certain potential, but then they decay as well because of its very inherent nature of this zone of existence. My view is what we are facing or experiencing is a physical interface to a much larger metaphysical reality. So what is beyond quantum field, what is the next level or deeper level of existence? We are blinded from that, we don't know that, but there has to be something beyond that where these quantum fields come from. So what we are experiencing is just a material zone in which is restricted by time and space, and inherently it is not very real.
What you're proposing is the integration of spirituality into medicine. I see that aligns beautifully with the deeper archetypal forces that are shaping human evolution. And the integration of spirituality and medicine reflects the themes of transcendence, soul healing, and dissolving the separation between science and the sacred. Is there one guiding principle you would like to leave our listeners with?
More for their physical health or more for spiritual health?
Both.
I would say that have this understanding of your frame of life, that the first rule that described in the book, that as we dwell in this space-time zone or in our life, there is a path to it, and we are on a journey, and the end destination is death. We have to be mindful of that. There's end destination of death, and we have a limited time frame. In that limited time frame, we have to see what our priorities are and what that is what we want to do. I think each person really should ask this question to themselves. If I understand this framework, which is self-evident, that I have a limited time frame, I would eventually die, and if your belief in the afterlife, that I have a consciousness beyond my death, then what is that life like, and how do I prepare myself for that? If you have that kind of perspective, then you can shape your life accordingly. And I would encourage you to do their own investigation as to what, based on their faith and their understanding, how do they see themselves after death? And then having that perspective is important. And what is the goal of my journey? That, let's say, one simple goal could be to grow my soul. So what is my soul? How do I grow my soul? How do I become a better version of myself? How do I cultivate the good qualities in my soul? Let's say, get rid of things like jealousy, arrogance, bias, or racism, or other things that we inherently know that's not good for us.
I think your vision is timely, and I think restructuring science and spirituality signals to me a bold new approach to transcendence. I think we'll start to see medicine shift from a purely mechanistic model to a consciousness-based model. This is not about rejecting science, but it's about transcending reductionism to embrace a whole person approach where the psyche and the soul and the cosmos all play a role in healing.
I think you're absolutely right. There is a more comprehensive approach to health. One of the lectures I give in our medical school is titled as Convergence of Science and Spirituality and Future of Medicine, and try to integrate these ideas that actually the science is catching up with spirituality. So spirituality already has given certain truths to us, and science is not caught up to it. But as quantum theory evolves and as our understanding evolves about human life, we would realize that many of those rules that spirituality was giving us are actually true from scientific perspective as well. So that distinction would start to disappear. Of course, we still have to maintain the scientific principle and rigor and make sure that we don't integrate things that are not necessarily true, because there could be many other things out there which may not be true. We have to apply the lens of rationality and science before we accept things. But at the same time, we should not necessarily disregard things just because we don't understand them.
Dr. Jafri, this has been a fascinating discussion. You've given us so much to reflect on: our deep-rooted desire for permanence in an impermanent world, the illusions we chase, the deeper reality that calls us beyond what we see and touch. And as we've explored, life itself is transient, but the longing for truth, beauty, and meaning points us towards something greater, a higher consciousness, a divine reality that's everlasting. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find you and where can people buy your book?
So the two books, The God and God of Science, and then 40 Spiritual Rules for the Journey of Life from Quran, both are available on Amazon. If they want to reach out to me, I would give my email address, which is S as in Sam, H as in Harry, R as in Robert, and the last name Jafri, JAFRI, Jafri at hotmail.com if somebody wants to reach. But again, thank you very much, Peter, for your time. I think it was a good opportunity to be able to explain some of the things that were written in the book.
Thank you for sharing your insights, your wisdom, and your perspective on this deeply profound topic, which we've only scratched the surface. But I see that your ability to bridge science and spirituality and human experience is going to evolve.
Yes, no, thank you very much. Hopefully this will be useful for the listeners.
How have you experienced the conversation today?
Excellent. I think this was a good, meaningful, and deep, and you touched the right points and asked the right questions. The idea of conversation is to open up the ideas and the things that are hidden and bring them out into the world. You did the right thing in terms of asking the questions and probing the right way.
Thank you. We're planting a seed for human awareness to take root.
Yeah, so I think you're doing a great job. I think this is already happening. The next thought of human revolution is really in spirituality, that people realize that there's a spiritual dimension to our existence, and unless we pay attention to that, we would be suffering. Our suffering would only increase.